Cool. All right, we're recording and we're just
Recording in progress.
hanging out for a little bit here.
Will we have access to the recording?
That's a good question. Are you gonna make this recording available, or is this just for the box people?
This is, yeah, that's a great question. What I had chatted with the festival organizers about was that we would share this with people who were attendees of the festival, as well as like the newsletter list. So that's for
Oh,
the
great.
festival to decide. But yeah, we've kind of left that open that we'll share this. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Well, if you want to use, if you want to, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh, and this is a good question that one person had about the sheets. If you need something to take notes on, feel free to
Mhm.
write on the sheet. You can take that with you.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to get started?
Yeah. I think we'll go ahead and let's jump on in.
All right. I guess I covered most of the stuff. I think a few people came in since then. I'll just say it again in case. The little cup mat that you have there, it says you're going to use your own cup, but you're actually not. We'll provide you with both cups, and then you'll give both cups back. And just don't start drinking the tea quite yet.
Not yet.
If you have questions or comments or anything that comes up, you can submit it either using the QR code, which is a basically direct text to Sooz here, or you can just raise your hand or speak up and I'll bring the mic to you and you can just ask your question verbally, vocally. Uh,
Yeah.
so without further ado, I'll turn it over to our excellent leader here, Sooz from Being Tea.
Yay! Hi everyone. Thanks so much for being here, coming out to Tea Fest. How many folks, just kind of show of hands, is it anybody's first year? It's like first year time. Oh, how cool! Yay! Well, welcome. Thanks for being here. That's awesome. Feels like it grows every year. We're doing a really special festival at home box program for people who can't join us in person. We did this last year, and I noticed this year as I was filling out the shipping addresses for everybody, it's like a lot of new names, a lot of new folks. So that's really cool. I'm so glad the show grows every year. This Tea Fest is a show that's really dear and near to me. I love this festival a great deal. Been teaching with them for a long time. I am in my tea studio in Chicago right now, so I'm not able to travel to be in person, but I love doing these sessions with Tea Fest virtually. It's really cool. So as David said, my name is Sooz. My pronouns are they and she, and I am based in Chicago, where I've been here for 16 years, I guess. I've worked for 20 years in tea, and so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is kind of based off of just really common things that I encounter a lot as an educator. My full time job is teaching and sharing tea. I'm the founder of Being Tea, which is an education space that I have owned and operated for going on 10 years now. I've worked for a lot of different tea companies and organizations over the years. And yeah, so I'm really excited to kind of chat a little bit more about maybe some common things that we hear about tea as we're learning about tea that we're not quite sure. Like, and that's fair to say that there might be something that you encounter that you don't know it's a myth or not. Like it's just something you've heard, right? I think we all hear a lot of those things. So I'm going to share with you some of the most common ones that I hear, and kind of break some of those down. And as David also said, yeah, like if at any point you want to share one with me, if there's something that you've heard that you're not quite sure if this is a thing or not, you can use the mic. You can also scan the little QR code and just type directly to me, and I'll see your message. And we're going to work in as many of those as we can. And feel free, like I'm just going to kind of go through our little categories here of myths, but feel free to interrupt. Like, just jump in anytime. That's totally fine in this session. We're going to try to fill as many as we can. And we're going to get to tasting in just a moment here. So, like, hold off on the two teas there in front of you. First thing I want to talk about, though, is just the basic categories we're going to explore today. So we're going to start with just some general myths about tea. Some of those kind of most common ones I hear. And then we're going to get into myths about brewing, which I think is where a lot of these come in. Just general things about how to brew tea and what is the right way, wrong way, etc. We're going to talk about a couple myths about caffeine and health and myths about storage and freshness of tea. So it's helpful to kind of think of things in sort of little buckets there. But first, before we get to all those, I want to do a little tasting with y'all. So you should have 2 teas in front of you. You don't have to taste them in any order, but I would invite you to taste both of them and just tell me which one you prefer. We're going to talk about them after we do it. There is no right or wrong answer to this. It is completely preference-based, but I'm just curious which one you prefer, number 1 or number 2. They are the same tea. I'll tell you that much right now. Just kind of take your time with it. If anybody needs a refill, we can get on that going here for you. But just, yeah, a little sip of each one. You might also prefer both, but for different reasons.
If you need more tea, raise the hand and we will go.
Yeah, thank you.
Did everybody hear that? You need more tea, just raise your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, got one taker in the front. Yeah.
No, I'm trying not to drink it so fast myself. I am tea thirsty.
First tea of the day for all of us.
I know, right? Yeah. All right. So, what are some thoughts in general? Let's just start with real basic. Show of hands. Who feels they confidently prefer cup number 1? Anybody confidently prefer cup number 1? Cool. All right. And confidently prefer cup number 2? Cool. And prefer both, like you enjoy both more or less equally, but you can tell there's a difference between them. All right. So that's nice. We're sort of like equally split here then. So we have maybe a third prefer cup number 1, a third prefer cup number 2, and a third enjoy both. Would anybody like to share some things that they notice between the two? Like if you have a preference or if you just notice the difference between them, what are you picking up between cup number 1 and cup number 2?
Number 1, sorry, I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Feel that cup number 1 is a strong tea, even though they're both light in color, and number 2 is a lighter one, which seemed more refreshing to me.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yep. Other differences between cup number 1 and cup number 2?
I just noticed the number 1 has a lot more grassy notes and just an overall flavor. Number 2, it's pretty good. I think she said also like refreshing because it's a little bit more watery. I would still drink it, but I prefer number 1.
Okay, nice.
Any other thoughts?
Was there anybody who feels like you don't notice as much of a difference between these two? And would anybody who doesn't know as much of a difference like to share what they don't notice?
Like a lot of takers on refills also. So.
Yeah. Okay, so let's chat about these a little bit. So what we have here is a white tea. I'm drinking the same white tea that you are. I've brewed it the same way that it's prepared for you in the classroom. One of the myths that I still hear a lot is around how to brew white tea. I think largely this has been changing over the years. Oh, hold on just 1 second. That was my doorbell. And I can't do anything about that. All right, we're all good. Luckily, my doorbell is right there. So with white tea, There are recommendations to brew it for quite a while, like 4 to 5 minutes at a hotter temperature. Maybe some of you have seen that. And then there's also recommendations to brew it almost cooler than a green tea, to brew it like a minute and steep it around like 170, 175, so really quite cool. And so it leads to very different experiences with white tea. I often, as a teacher, encounter students who have had maybe not so nice experiences with white tea, and they say that it tastes watery. So for those of you who preferred or noticed that one of these cups is significantly lighter, a little bit more watery than the other, it's paler in color, that is what leads to that. So it's just steeped for a minute. It's around like 170, 175. I've seen recommendations for as low as 160, which is what we typically brew Japanese green teas. I'll talk about why there's this disparity in a minute. But yeah, so what this can lead to with some, not all, but some white teas is a very, very light brew that tastes, it's refreshing and kind of has like this sort of like nice kind of mouth watering. Reminds me a little bit of like when you drink ice water, kind of feeling in your mouth, but it's not particularly really colorful, really deep and rich in flavor. It doesn't carry like all the same sort of floral, fruity, vegetable kind of notes as we're used to with our white tea. So then the other camp is brewing white tea nearly at boiling water, you know, anywhere between 195 and full boil, and steeping it for 4 or 5 minutes. And that's how, like when I was first trained, I was trained to brew white tea that way, like soak it for a long time. It's actually a tea that can tolerate really, really long steeping and not get bitter. It brings out a real fullness and kind of lushness and flavor that's really, really nice. And so as a teacher, I default to that as the way to present it first, because it counteracts this sort of almost overly light experience that people have often as their first one with white tea. That is not wrong. It's just that it takes a while to sort of get into that mode. I recently learned from somebody who is a producer, like a tea producer in China, actually, something kind of fascinating, that one of the reasons for this myth that white tea needs to be brewed really cool, so that's a myth, basically. Let's bust this one, that white tea needs to be brewed as cool as green tea and that you can't use hot water on it. That's a myth. You're tasting one. It's got really hot water on it, right? You can see the color's great. It's full, right? Like, you absolutely can do it, right? I learned from this tea producer that one of the reasons why there's this myth that you have to brew white tea at a really cool temperature is because it's making up for white tea that's not really made properly. White tea that hasn't had like its full, like a really long withering process, and it's a very slow developing tea when we're producing it. And if that is shortcutted by someone who's making the tea, like or there maybe is inexperienced with developing the flavor, it tastes bitter if you brew really hot water on it. So they've made this recommendation of, oh, you need to make it really cool and soft and gentle, right? To make up for the fact that it's actually not the most well-made tea. I thought that was really fascinating, because I've encountered that too, just tasting many white teas over the years. That this myth that has been put out there that it needs to be brewed a certain way is actually making up for tea that's not made very well. One of the things when we talk about brewing a little bit later is that a well-made tea, you could brew it at any temperature and it will still taste good. It's more of like, how strong and how deep do you want that flavor to be? But when it's on the, the hotter end, it's going to be richer. It's going to be more potent. But a well-made tea can withstand any range of temperature, right? So the idea that it has to go in kind of one area it's a myth. It's a myth. And moreover, it's also about preference. So it seems like most of you were kind of like, you could go either way with it. You enjoyed both of these cups, right? They're both lovely. And that's one reason why I wanted to do this tasting blind, and so that you didn't have that kind of lead into it, right? It's just genuinely, what do you prefer on any given day too, right? If it's super hot, humid, whatever, we might prefer one tea over another, right? But they're both good. They're both lovely. So yeah, first myth busted. Feel free to enjoy as much as you like for refill if you kind of want to sample them a little bit more. Notice them as they cool too. Like tea tends to change quite a bit as it cools. And that can maybe shift some of our preferences a bit. Mm-hmm. All right.
Got another question here, Sooz.
Yeah, please. Question.
I bought a chart that has the different types of tea on it, and it tells the different types of water temperature and brewing time. And for white, it did say to brew it no higher than 185, because it says you burn the leaves and then it makes it taste bitter.
Yeah. So you experienced one. I'm just going to kind of summarize that, make sure I got on the recording for folks. That you were paying attention to one of those little brew charts, and it said to brew white tea at like around 185 and not go hotter. And then when you did, it became bitter than that. Yeah. So. And it doesn't mean that that's like when I say not a properly made tea, I mean, I don't mean that it's like bad or it's harmful or anything. It's just that properly made means that the tea has a really wide range of how it can be handled, and it will show really well. So one that is a little bit more sensitive, maybe it's not as a well-made tea and gets a little bitter and such. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't drink it. It just means that you're gonna have to handle that one a little bit, like below 180, to bring out those like softer notes, because it can get edgy. Yeah.
And
So it's
you weren't saying that you had experienced that so much as that was what it said on the chart, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it wasn't.
Oh, I thought I had heard that you did do that. Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
a lot of those charts out there.
There really are.
They vary widely in their interpretations.
They really do. Yeah. And we're going to get into that too a little bit. So first, let's start with a couple like just general myths, and maybe again some things that you have heard. First one, that tea bags aren't good quality. See also that whole leaf is best. Anybody heard this one? Have we all heard some version of this, that tea bags aren't really all that great? Or that they're made from the dust on the bottom of the factory floor or something like that, that's a waste product? So rude. So rude. That's absolutely not true. In a lot of cases, tea bag tea is made from the same whole loose leaf tea as the loose leaf tea. If you have handled enough loose leaf tea, maybe you have noticed this yourself, that inside the package there's some pieces that are naturally broken. Anybody seen that? Like some kind of broken pieces inside their package of tea. That's just something that happens naturally with a dried leaf. It's going to break up, right? And so tea bag tea, all that is just sorting out the little small pieces that will fit into a tea bag really nicely. Right? It could be from the same whole leaf, but it's just sifted out. Sometimes the leaf is cut to size for that. But that same farm, that same producer could produce extremely high quality, award-winning whole leaf, beautiful tea, and also produce tea bag tea that is more economical for a lot of folks to buy, that they sell a lot of easily because it's a more affordable price. It's kind of like the bread and butter product, right? Think of like how a bakery produces your basic breads and cookies that everyone knows, right? That no one has to explain to them, right? When they come in, they just see it and they get it. And they also produce the fancier stuff that you have to explain a little bit, right? Or the specials, right? A tea factory and tea production is a lot like that. You're going to have things that are the bread and butter, that's really easy for people to understand and approach. It's affordable. That's a pantry staple. And you're also going to have teas that are the ones that are really fancy, that could be a little spendier, they're more seasonal, that are just more time consuming when it comes to their production. And both can come from the same farm, the same producer, right? And so the myth that if it comes in a tea bag, it's not good quality, that is a huge myth. It's also extremely rude. It's very rude in that it's assuming that the people who produce teas that are for tea bags are somehow not as worthy people, that they're not working just as hard, that they're not just as skilled. Come on, that's rude, right? What makes it good or not good quality is taste. That's it. And that's for you to determine. Like, you taste it and you say, I enjoy this or I don't enjoy it, right? Tea bag also is something that it provides convenience for people, and that's a big deal, especially when it comes to like accessibility, when it comes to being able to travel with tea. If it's the choice between, like I always tell folks, if it's a choice between having tea in a tea bag or not having tea and having to have like, I don't know, soda or something instead. Have the tea in the tea bag, right? So, learn more about where your tea comes from, who produces it. There's a lot of lovely vendors at TeaFest who are small makers, small-time producers who make their own tea in tea bags, right? It's not the same conversation from a small producer or small business as it is when you're looking at like, a multinational owned by Unilever or something, where you're more concerned about like how the environment is handled, workers' rights, things like that. It's a totally different conversation. The medium itself, the tea bag, is not the problem. It's the source considerations where it comes from. So no, tea bags are not bad quality. They're not lower quality. They could be the same good quality as whole leaf tea. Total myth. Next one, and kind of related to that.
Sooz, before we go on,
Oh, yeah.
I had a quick thought about that because I've noticed that tea bags are a great place to experiment with brewing because often, it'll be a very fine cut of leaf or, something else that makes it super susceptible to brewing changes. And so sometimes a tea bag that you have dismissed as being bad has actually just been like overbrewed or underbrewed or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, to me, kind of worth playing around with a little bit to see if you can find a brew style that fits the bag, as it were.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And also, side note, so at Being Tea, we have classes every week here, live online. We have classes in our library, hundreds of classes. We've done a few, including one actually just this last month about working with broken pieces of tea, because they can be a little trickier to brew because they steep so quickly. But it's not lower quality. It's certainly not something to just discard, as waste. Like, you can learn a lot from working with broken teas. It's a skill to be able to do so. So yeah, great point. Yeah, question.
Oh, I had a question, and that is that if I'm getting, say, one of the major brands of tea bags, how can they be consistent in, say, whatever it is? How can they be consistent without blending?
How do they get consistent flavor in a tea bag? They do blend.
I would think they'd have to.
Yeah,
blend.
yeah. Most teas actually.
Time after time after time. You have
Yep.
to.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. Most teas, to a certain degree, are blends. They may not be as large of a blend as, say, like Lipton, and it's easy to overlook Lipton and be like, ugh, that's not good quality. But it's extremely skillful tea, actually. Lipton's really challenging in that one little humble bag has something like 30 different teas in it, blended from different origins and stuff to create a specific kind of recipe, right? And that's how you get that consistency, right? And so think of the enormity of that challenge to replicate that, to taste thousands of teas to get a very specific flavor profile and yield that result. Now, most teas that are blended are done so in a much more smaller scale way, like just within that farm, they may blend yesterday's batch with today's batch or something like that, right? The kind of particular chasing after a single origin unblended tea, that's a relatively kind of new phenomenon within like the last decade or so, but yeah, it's not the majority of tea that we drink. A lot of teas are blends, just in a much more subtle way. That's how you get that consistency. Yeah, because consistency matters for people when they're drinking tea and getting into it. Yeah, that's a great question. That kind of relates to our next myth here that I want to bust up for us. That some origins are quote unquote good or always clean, and others are quote unquote bad or lower quality or dirty and such. And even just framing this question in this way is rude. I frame it in this way because I have heard it this way. The assumption that, for example, that every tea that comes from Japan is going to be automatically good because Japan has a highly modernized tea production. And so then when we look at something that's a lot more rural or less developed or not as expensive because it doesn't have as much equipment and highly, super advanced facilities for it, maybe something like from Laos, something from Burma, something from Vietnam, right? That may not be as high quality. And that is a huge, huge myth. That's really, it's very ignorant. Again, even just framing the question this way feels icky. There is no such thing as an origin that is always good or always best, and one that is, because it's more rural or not as developed or industrialized, that is somehow dirty or low quality. That's not true. Again, it comes down to taste. And I know that seems really simplistic, but that's literally what buyers do. When we are tasting tea, we're just tasting, and we're considering everything that goes into that, right? We're considering the skillfulness of the production, how the tea was picked. We're considering the environment that it was made. And some things that are considered really valuable in one origin, in terms of flavor, could be considered less valuable in another. And that's okay. For example, like a Japanese green tea, you wouldn't really describe that as being smoky. Like smoky is not something that we would want like in a matcha, right? For example, or sencha. It's not really a particular flavor profile that tea is known for. But then like a green tea from Vietnam that is fired in a wok, that is, heated by wood, is going to be a little smoky, just slightly, from the wood. And that's considered part of the character of that tea. That's a valuable part of the appreciation of that tea, right? You wouldn't say that like that tea is not as well made because it's got some smokiness from the firing and it's like lower quality or something. Like, no, like that's part of what we love about it, right? But it's okay that in a Japanese tea, because they're made differently, that's not part of its character, right? In other words, the world of tea is so diverse and so rich that we're going to have lots of variables. We're going to have lots of things that from one place to another are what we value and appreciate, and that is okay, but it has nothing to do with like that one is better or more skilled than the other. And that's a really important thing for us to take into consideration when we're looking at, like climate change, for example, that everywhere we buy tea from is changing. And so we're expanding the places that we're sourcing our tea and where we're learning about beyond just kind of the main countries like China, Japan, and India and such. We're trying teas from so many different places now and so many different regions and origins. And so it's really important that we go into that with an open mind, an open palate, just tasting and letting taste be the guide, because that really is what determines it. It's through taste and through quality alone. We did have a question that came in on the chat. Somebody asked about what defines a well-made tea in the production process. I will say that's way a bit beyond our what we have time for today, because it's more of a discussion about tea production. But and it's harder to just sort of summarize that in a couple of notes and have that be something where you could take away and be like, I can identify a well-made tea. But it just simply means that the person or the people, usually it's a team of people, handling the leaf after they've harvested it, understand how to best adapt that leaf to the conditions of the moment, because tea is harvested nearly year-round in some places. And so every day that they're making tea from the fresh leaf, it's going to be a little bit different. How would you handle it on a cloudy day versus a really hot, bright, sunny day? Or in lower humidity versus high humidity, right? Because the leaf is going to respond to all the conditions of, say, like the wok when you're firing it and drying it, or the room where you're allowing it to wilt and get soft so it can be pliable, right? Does it need 10 hours or 8 hours of wilting time, right? Like it's very different. And so all of these things are what defines a well-made tea, is how skillfully somebody matches the needs of the tea with the environment. And so it's just simply through tasting a lot of tea that you get a real sense for how that skill is developed. Yeah. It's not a simple like checklist. Like you could look at the color, you could look at the, like the smell or something like that, and then say, yes, that's well made or not. Yeah, it's a lot more complex than that, but it's a great question. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. Whoever did.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance to go to a place where tea is being made, it's a real treat.
Yeah.
Lot of like very careful sensory evaluation of what's happening moment to moment. Even in a factory, you think of a factory as fairly automated, but I mean they're controlling some of the environmental factors in a factory more than you can outdoors, but there's still a lot of adaptation that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll move next into some myths about brewing. And again, like this is the one where I think a lot of the myths come from, is around brewing. One that I hear most often, that you should rinse your tea before brewing. Anybody hear this? I get a lot of questions. Yeah, I get a lot of questions about this one, that you should rinse your tea before brewing. This one is a bit of a myth, but also not. There are some categories of tea where we do this, primarily pu'er tea, which is an aged fermented tea, and with some oolongs, particularly like more like darker oolongs that are like rolled into a little ball like we see in the photo here. Rinsing is not something that you have to do. I guess that part is the myth part, and that's the helpful part to clear up. You do not have to rinse your tea. It's important to know why you do it in the first place to decide if you're going to do it. We rinse tea for some categories because it helps to soften the leaves so that they will soak up water more efficiently and you'll get a more even flavor. Because some teas are, just because of the surface of the leaf, the way that it is, if you don't rinse it and kind of like give it a little warm up first, you're just going to sort of saturate that outer layer, and it doesn't taste very deep. Like it's sort of this, it just kind of tastes like a wash, basically. And so fermented teas, for example, that have had some time in storage, if they're compressed into like a little cake or something, they need a little help with that. It also helps to kind of brighten up the flavor, especially if it has been in storage for a while, to give it a little rinse. Oolongs that you see that are rolled into like a little ball or something, it helps to soften it up a bit so that it can soak in some water better. But you don't have to do it in terms of quality. If you're ever curious, like try it and taste the rinse water. It won't hurt you. Just taste it and you'll see why you do it for those teas, because it just kind of tastes like meh, you know? It's just there for, you know, it's a practice to help the tea brew better, basically. But you do not need to do it with really any other categories of tea. Do not do it with your white tea or your green tea or your black tea, your softer green oolongs, because these are teas that are already very pliable, very easily soaking up the water. And if you rinse it, you're actually just kind of rinsing away a good part of what makes the tea tasty. It's not great to do that. So it's a myth that you need to do it for tea. But we do it for some specific categories because it helps improve flavor. But that's it. So again, like pu'er teas and heavily roasted oolongs or ball rolled oolongs, it's helpful for those. Yeah. But any other ones? Nah, not so much. The next brewing myth, we've kind of touched on this one a little bit, is that green tea burns when brewed in water that's too hot. I've heard so many different versions of this, that it burns or that it scalds the leaves or that it damages the leaves. No, it does not. Again, like think about like kind of like the logics of this. Centuries ago, before we had electric kettles that could control the temperature of our tea, we brewed everything in hot water, like really hot water. We couldn't really control the temperature. The way that you would control the temperature might be to add a little bit of more cool water to the pot, the kettle, but that's it. You certainly couldn't set a dial, right? We brewed everything in hot water. Part of the skill was learning how to work with the really hot water to get the flavor you want. And so if you have water that is maybe not the ideal temperature range, like you're looking at the little chart for the tea and it says to brew your green tea at like 175 and you're like, I don't have a way to do that. A way to compensate for that is to just reduce the steep time. Just brew it for a little bit less time. We had a great class actually here recently where we brewed all of our tea in boiling hot water, including all of our green tea, and it was actually all really tasty. You just need to adjust the steep time and make it a little shorter. That's all. Take off like a minute or so for it. The temperature range is there because it helps to guarantee that if you try this, you're going to get like a pretty good result, basically. The charts and all the brewing recommendations that you see, those are just to give people a starting point, actually. It's just to simply say like, hey, if you're a little new to handling tea, we like this tea brewed this way. And if you try it, this is a way that we think is kind of like a nice ideal of how to present this tea. And then you can play with it. All brewing recommendations are an invitation to play with them. They're not rules. And you certainly won't damage the tea by brewing it in water that's outside of its. There's nothing that you could do that would do that. Hotter water will bring out more from the tea faster. That's the effect of hot water. It brings out more of the like flavor, brings out more of the aroma. It also brings out more of the caffeine and some other things that can taste kind of bitter to us. So that's why that if you leave it in the water for a long time and the water is boiling hot, it will taste bitter for some teas. That's why, you're going to have kind of more of some of the bitter elements being extracted. So that's what we're working around when we make brewing recommendations, but it's all the taste. Like I have plenty of students who love the taste of really strongly brewed, kind of more bitter green tea, right? That's totally fine. You're not hurting the leaf. You're not making any less healthy, anything like that, which brings us to a related myth. And that is that black tea needs to be brewed in boiling water. No, it does not. I have plenty of black teas that I absolutely love at like 190, especially in the summer. Just takes a little of the edge off. It's less intense. It's a little less sharp. It's lovely, right? So again, brewing recommendations are suggestions. They are a place for you to get started, but feel free to experiment based on what you taste and what you enjoy the most, right? But yeah, nothing will make it kind of like any less healthy or anything like that, right? Before we shift to our next area, any question, like anything about brewing that you have heard or that like kind of fits into that umbrella, something that you want to ask about? Ooh, got one coming.
Is it true that if you drink old green tea, that it's toxic?
Lord, no. I've never even heard. That's one I haven't heard. I'm trying to think of like the context for that. Yeah. Why? Yeah. So the question for people watching later. Yeah. If you when you drink a green tea later, is it an old green tea? Is it toxic?
One add-on to that. You were saying like brewed green tea that's been sitting around for a long time, as opposed to brewing aged
old leaf.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, if it sits around long enough that it gets moldy.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. But that's with anything. That's not specific to green tea. Like anything that like hangs out for a couple days and it's just stale, and you would. I think what's really maybe helpful to layer in with this is our own sensibility and intuition as humans and as eaters on this planet who eat and drink a lot of things. I remember years ago, I did a really cool like 3-week residency for a fermentation camp to study like making all the fermented things. It was lovely. Like made breads and like fermented all the dairy, made cheese, made kefir, made yogurt, made all the sauerkraut and the kimchi, and that like just fascinating. And one of the things that we kind of laid out really easily right up front to understand is that your senses, your smell and your taste and your sight and everything, are by far one of your best teachers when it comes to food, and particularly things like fermentation, which is just basically controlled decay. And we need to learn how to trust that a bit more. And it's hard when we encounter a lot of things that tell us, you're not doing it right. Like you describe a tea and you say, I taste this. And someone says, no, that's not there. That's not how we say this. Those aren't the right words. The tea that has been sitting out for a long time would taste not great first. That would be your first indicator. In other words, you'd be like, this doesn't smell as nice. The nice floral or fruity notes are gone. It tastes flat. It tastes old. It tastes stale. That's your indicator that this is not a good thing now. And there's no need to pursue it any further than that. And as long as it doesn't have mold or something on that, it wouldn't hurt you, but it's not going to taste good. So there's really no point to drinking it, I guess. Yeah. Like trust your senses. Your senses are pretty smart. It won't hurt you, but everything that we love about how tea smells and how it tastes, a lot of that are what are called volatile compounds. They break down really quickly. They're not potent and active for very long. Some they're active for longer than others. Like this white tea, can hang out for most of the afternoon and it's still going to taste really lovely. Can even try it the next day. It's probably all right. Green tea doesn't have as much of that in it. So it it doesn't taste as good and fresh for as long. Green tea's kind of meant to be drunk in the moment. Which actually reminds me, one of our other questions that someone asked in the chat was that all green teas taste the same, kind of like as a myth that green tea tastes the same. Green tea has a relatively limited range of complexity that it can offer, like chemically speaking. It's not as complex of a category in terms of taste and flavor and aroma as, say, like a black tea or an oolong. So green tea does have kind of a relatively more narrow descriptive range. Like they're all going to taste roughly like green vegetables, right? And if you're not a fan of green vegetables, then yeah, that can kind of taste the same to you. If you spend time developing your taste and tasting and enjoying and really thinking about a wider range of foods and beverages in general, I think you could definitely deepen that and get more into it. But at first, yeah, it's understandable that it can kind of taste the same. A cup that's been sitting out too long, you might notice it gets a little dull, it's oxidized, it just doesn't look as appetizing. Yeah. So again, let your senses be your guide to that, I think. Yeah.
And on the senses being your guide thing, I think the biggest kind of revelation that I had in terms of brewing is just that. Like when I moved from going by the chart, so to speak, to trying to figure out what I like best in the tea, like how I can bring out the flavors, the aromas, the textures that I like best. And again, pretty much by playing around with it and like following your senses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I want to hold on. I see someone's hand raised. I want to get to, because I know we're going to run out of time here. So I want to cover our next couple of points, but feel free to type those in the chat to me. And we'll also try to get in as many as we can before we close additional questions, because I want to, just make sure we get our couple of these other key ones in. Hold that question, write it down if you need to. So our next one, the title of our class itself, that green tea is the healthiest tea. How many folks have heard some version of this? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Right. Or also that white tea is the healthiest, like insert anything else. No, there is not a single healthiest tea. Now, part of where this came from is not trying to be like misleading or anything like that. It's that when we look at where most of the studies that are funded for looking at green tea, who is doing those studies and how it's getting funded, it's largely in East Asia, right? Primarily in the U.S. I'll just say that it's hard to get funding for studying things that are not pharmaceutical. They're just like, it's very difficult for something that's involving food that can't be patented, that can't be made into a drug. It's very hard to get funding for that. So we just don't have as many studies yet, particularly in America, but other places do. And so a lot of the studies that are being done with healthful aspects of tea, it's largely East Asia, which mostly consumes green tea. So it is kind of a reasonable leap of logic then when you keep seeing health reports that say green tea for this, green tea for that. A study shows green tea does this, that you then make the assumption green tea must be the best because that's the only one I hear anybody talking about, right? So that's logical. But that's not the case. Like all of the categories of tea, white, yellow, black, oolong, pu'er, they've all been studied pretty extensively. Recently, actually, just a couple months ago, a new approved health claim in the United States was allowed to be, shared. Because in the U.S., we regulate what we're allowed to say about tea very tightly because it's not a pharmaceutical. It's a food. So we can't make big claims about it here. But we recently allowed another one to be issued for black tea concerning cardiovascular benefits and heart health, right? Like black tea is great for cardiovascular health. It's great for your heart, your circulatory system, right? So different teas kind of align themselves with sort of different healthful properties we've found, right? So like green tea has some compounds that are being investigated for like possibly preventing cancer, preventing mental degeneration with age, like Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that. They help with alertness. They help with anxiety, right? And then we have black tea for cardiovascular health. Oolong tea has been, really, and pu'er too, really looked at for digestive health, right? So the thing that I always tell folks when it comes to tea and health, it's a lot like considering fruits and vegetables and your relationship to that, right? Like rather than eating the only one healthy thing that you've heard about, like just eat kale, right? Maybe eat other vegetables too. Don't eat just kale, right? And the same thing is true for tea. Like don't just fixate on green tea because that's the only one you hear about. All of the other teas are also just as good for you, and like a good balance of tea in terms of health. If that's one of your drivers for why you're interested in tea is health, drink a variety of teas because they've all been, studied and are continue to being studied. None of them show any sort of like ill effects in terms of like, don't drink this tea, like they all come from the same plant too, which is a whole nother topic for a different class. But yeah, they all relate. They're all from the same parent plant. So it makes sense that they would all kind of carry that same potential benefit. But yeah, so green tea is not the healthiest. Tea itself is the healthiest, but not just one type. Relatedly, so let's talk a little bit about another big myth when it comes to health and such is that white tea has no caffeine and black tea has the most caffeine. Anybody heard this one? Yeah. So about that thing that it all comes from the same plant. So that means it's all going to have caffeine. So if it comes from the tea plant, if it comes from the Camellia sinensis plant, it's going to have caffeine. It varies a little bit between the categories, some, but it's roughly the same amount. Tea has roughly about a third of the caffeine that a cup of brewed coffee has. So if you drink coffee and you kind of know your response to that, you can kind of measure how you respond to tea accordingly. Some white tea, actually, by contrast to this myth, can have the most caffeine. Just simply by nature of like when it was harvested, the time of year, if that's peak growth for the plant, etc. So yeah, white tea can be pretty caffeinated. Sorry to bust anyone's bubble. So yeah, if you need no caffeine, you need to drink like herbal tea, something from another plant. There's a few herbals that do have caffeine, but by and large they don't. So like your chamomile, your peppermint, your ginger, stuff like that. Yeah, but if it comes from the tea plant, it's going to have some caffeine. Related myth. No, you can't rinse the caffeine off. That one still floats out there somewhere. You cannot rinse the caffeine off your tea. Doesn't work. That has been disproven since the 80s, but it still hangs around. That like if you do a quick little brew and then toss that you've rinsed off your... Nope. Let's see. I'm just like looking through my little list here because I want to make sure we get like the last good ones here. Let's talk a little bit about storage. Let's talk about freshness. And then we'll see if we can fit in a couple other ones from folks. I hear this one a lot. Store your tea in the refrigerator. Anybody heard this one? Usually also relates to matcha. Store your tea in the refrigerator for freshness. So some tea is stored in refrigeration, like at origin by the people that produced it, or at warehouses. But it's a very different kind of refrigeration than you have. It's much cooler, it's much drier, so very low humidity, and it also doesn't have your leftovers in it, right? So a typical fridge at home is going to smell like whatever food that you've got in there. It's going to be higher humidity as well. It's going to be not as cold. So there's actually a higher risk that you're going to just damage the tea by introducing moisture to the leaves, and it's going to go stale quicker. So storage for tea, just simply keeping it in like, the little pouches that it often comes in. They have like a little closure here, just squeeze out the air, just keep this at room temperature, away from heat and light and moisture and airflow, and this is fine. Your tea will keep for a long time in just a nice little foil sealed container. No need to refrigerate it. It goes well for some folks. I think if they just have a fridge that's dedicated to tea, I do know some businesses that do that, and that's different. Your average home fridge, you just don't want your tea smelling and tasting like eggs or cheese, onions. You don't want that. That's not good. Let's see. I want to see if there's a couple others here in the chat. Someone asks, relatedly, do you have to refrigerate teas after brewing? No. Don't refrigerate your tea after brewing, unless you want cold brew. Like I could pop this little friend in the fridge, maybe cover it again for the aromas that are in the fridge kind of consideration. Cover this with a little foil or plastic cup or something, and I could have a little cold tea later. That's nice. But often folks ask this when it comes to the leaves. Should you refrigerate the leaves after you're steeping? No. Nope. Your tea is good to re-steep quite a few times. 3, 4, 5. I mean, just depends on how often you want to, like how far you want to take that flavor. You do not need to refrigerate your leaves after you steep them. Same kind of thing. It just makes them taste not great. So just leave them in the pot, room temperature, let them hang out. I usually like to recommend that people enjoy their steeps within like 24 to 36 hours for peak freshness. And again, let your nose and your taste be your guide there. As long as it's not moldy or anything, it's fine. But yeah, first like 24 or 36 hours, it's fine. Just let it sit in the pot. Don't refrigerate it. I think we have time for, like, we had a question from somebody in the back earlier. If we want to take your question.
My teapot just said use fresh spring water. So is it just for taste, or is it gonna make the tea taste differently, like make it bitter, or using different, just tap water? Because if I have water sitting in my teapot, because I have one that's electric, I'll dump out that water and get fresh distilled water to use instead.
Okay, yeah, water freshness, water quality, all these things. Yeah, we could do a whole class on that too. A lot of these things around like water, that's, I would say it's not a myth. That is a pretty good recommendation. You don't need to use distilled water to brew tea. Actually, you want some mineral in your tea. If it's distilled water, it tastes really flat. It can also increase the acidity of the tea, and it tastes kind of sharp, just not so pleasant. So we do want some mineral in there. So definitely don't need distilled water. It doesn't have to be bottled spring water either. If you live in a place where like an area where like your tap water is not great, especially including for safety reasons, you can't use your tap water, then yeah, bottled spring water is nice. But otherwise, you could just take your tap water and just run it through a Brita pitcher, just a carbon filter, helps clean it up really nicely. All you need to do is remove excess mineral, as well as chlorine. And if you happen to have like old pipes or something like that, it removes like lead and things like that too. Tap water tends to have too much mineral for tea. Most tap water. Some places have really great tap water, like New York City infamously has beautiful tap water, and you could just brew your tea straight out of the tap. It's great. San Francisco also has great tap water, yeah. But most places, their water's really hard. And the main thing there is that there's too much mineral in the water, that there's literally not enough space to extract good flavor from the tea into the water. And so the tea tastes kind of funny. So just filtered water is good. Run it through a Brita pitcher. If that doesn't help, you could use bottled spring water. But the thing, yeah, like just to simplify that recommendation, I always tell folks, like, if you wouldn't drink your own tap water, adding tea to it ain't going to make it taste better. Your tea wants better water, but it doesn't have to be distilled. Yeah.
Good time for one more.
Think so.
All right.
This is a question related to origin. So I've heard that, you don't buy teas from the US because there's more pesticides, and from other countries there may be fewer pesticides. Is there any truth to that?
Not exactly, no. So the question was regarding origin, that we don't get teas from the US because there's possibly more pesticides than compared to other origins, which use fewer. No, not exactly. We do grow tea in the U.S. Actually, quite a few states grow tea. Minto Island tea is, you can go visit them at the show, right? We don't commonly grow tea in the U.S. largely because of economics of it. Because like the labor to produce tea, there's no way that U.S. labor to produce tea at the scale and the quality that we're used to from other places. Like tea, a lot of tea, most teas are hand harvested. So like all these like little buds and stuff that you see, like that's hand harvested. Machine harvesting definitely exists, but like the highest quality still tends to be hand harvested. We just don't have that. Like in terms of labor, in terms of skill, like literally the knowledge depth of generations of people who've done it, we don't have that. So it's way too expensive to produce. The places in the US that do produce tea, it's very small scale. Like the Mississippi Tea Company has really great tea down in Mississippi as well. Hawaii's been producing tea for a few decades. It's beautiful quality, but very small scale. So it has nothing to do with that. It's economics. Pesticide use varies widely per country. It's not something, kind of going back to that question of like, are there some origins that are clean and some origins that are dirty? No, there's not. One thing that you could look for is who that farm sells to, who else carries their tea, if you might have, some knowledge of that. So for example, a producer in China, who also sells their same tea to some places in Europe or in Japan, those places have much stricter controls over pesticide residues than the US does. So if their quality is good enough to export to Japan or to Taiwan or to Europe, it's good quality, right? And you do see that with like a lot of small producers, because getting certified organic, and again, that's like a whole other class and discussion, but it's extremely expensive for tea producers. Most tea producers can't afford it. It's very expensive to do. But a lot of tea is grown pesticide free from smaller producers simply by nature of that they can't afford the agrochemicals. So it requires a bit of digging. It requires a bit of like getting to know where you're buying the teas from. I would say don't go on a kind of a bender where you really start demanding all your tea is certified organic, because it will greatly limit the tea that you can enjoy. And also it completely disregards the fact that there are plenty of teas that are grown pesticide free, or at least very, very low use, where those producers just can't afford that kind of certification. Because it is extremely expensive and they pay for it. The companies they sell to, their government, they don't pay for it. They pay for it as the tea grower, right? So get to know your tea better rather than just rely on like a little label that says certified organic and assume that means it's automatically clean. Also, organic does not mean it's pesticide free. It just means that it uses organic pesticides. Doesn't mean it's pesticide free. But yeah, so to your original question, no, the difference of why we don't have tea commonly in the US relates to pesticide. No, it's a labor issue. Yeah, really good question. Any others? Can we squeeze in one more, David?
Anybody got one for us? I think we're pretty much at time, and it sounds like maybe people don't have more questions.
Okay, cool.
Did you leave with any like find me online type info?
Yeah. I was just gonna say, if you do think of things later, yeah, you're super welcome to send me a note. On Instagram at beingtea. My website's beingtea.com. My email is hello@beingtea.com. You also have a little card from me. Yeah, if there's anything else that comes to mind for folks that you would like to know, yeah, I'd love to hear from you. But otherwise, thanks so much for joining us, for being here at the festival. Welcome to everyone who's a first-year attendee. I hope you have a wonderful... Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're so welcome.